Well, welcome everybody, UKIP members and members of the press and the media. Who would have thought that this is where we'd be in April 2019, back here fighting a European election, the one place that Europe, that UKIP doesn't want to be. But we are here. Now, we shouldn't be taking part in these European elections at all. Now, we're here today with the candidates. Unfortunately, we can't have all 73 here today. They can't all make it, and they can't all sit on the stage. It's too small. But we've got a big selection of our top candidates, and some of them are going to be saying something today in the time available. Now, there wouldn't be European elections if the referendum decision had been honoured. But of course, we know that it hasn't. As Kirsten said, it's been betrayed. The democratic decision of 17.4 million people has been deliberately and cynically betrayed by the political class. And these European elections, which shouldn't be taking place at all, will inevitably be a rerun of the referendum question. Whatever the different political parties say, it is inevitably going to come down to a vote of do you want to leave or do you want to remain? So what should the British people do with their vote? Who should they vote for? Well, in my mind, you have two simple choices. The Remainers should all vote Liberal Democrat, because the Liberal Democrats are the true party of Remain. They're as consistent in that as UKIP has been consistent in Leave. So put your vote where it belongs if you're a Remainer. Vote Liberal Democrat. But where should the Leavers vote? Well, UKIP is the authentic party of Brexit. We're the true party of Leave. We have fought this fight now since 1992-93 when the party was set up. It was the UKIP electoral threat that actually brought about the referendum, and I would argue that it was UKIP boots on the ground, and certainly Nigel Farage on the TV, and lots of other people who achieved that Leave vote. In the face of tremendous organised Remain propaganda from the mainstream media, from all of the main, so-called main political parties, and from the institutional establishment, including, of course, President Obama, who even went to the trouble of making a special visit to the UK to threaten us in our own country and tell us how to vote. Despite all that, they failed, and Leave won. Now, UKIP's policy in this election will be very clear and straightforward. It's one of unilateral and unconditional withdrawal. No ifs or buts. And of course, the Remainers said that the Leavers didn't have a plan for leaving. Well, that was true of some Leave campaigners. It was true of the Main campaign, for example, but it wasn't true of UKIP. Back in 2014, I wrote a little book called The Road to Freedom, when the referendum was only a promise on the horizon. And I said, if there was a referendum, if Leave won, this is what would happen. The whole process would be delayed, impeded by the political and media establishment with the intention of overturning the result. And where are we 2 years and 10 months later? Well, there's no prizes for knowing that answer, is there? We are very firmly in the second half of the overturning process, which is precisely what they plan to do. Now, how would you leave then? So I'll give you a very brief synopsis of that. Back in 2017, Paul Nuttall, who was the leader, appointed me as the Brexit spokesman, and I wrote up the plan in a lot more detail, which is still published on our website. If you were going to leave the European Union, you would not have gone down the Article 50 road. As I wrote then, it was a trap to stop you leaving, not a means of helping and facilitating a country to leave. And indeed, there's a very good article about Brexit that was written by Tom McKay in the Politico magazine very recently, in which he said, if they had done what I said, and he wasn't quoting me, of course, but he said if the British government had just presented the EU with a fait accompli and told them what it was going to do and forgot Article 50, then they would have been forced to accept it. So what should have been done? If we'd have had a patriotic Prime Minister and a patriotic government and a patriotic House of Commons who intended to implement the result of the referendum, then the first thing they would have done would repeal the European Communities Act 1973. We would have then said to the EU, we just left under our law, not your law, our law. We're no longer members. But don't worry, because all of your law has been incorporated into our law by means of acts of parliament and regulations and other means. And indeed, there was a very good draft repeal bill written by Bill Cash, the Tory MP, which I incorporated in my plan because the work has already been done. And it said all that law remains in place, but we can now start repealing it and amending it in our timescales and according to our priorities, not the EU's. First thing you would have done would have been offered continued tariff-free trade or WTO terms, and it's the EU's choice because they're the ones that are going to have to make that choice. But do it quick, decide what you want. Then we could have guaranteed citizens' rights for both parties on the continent and here. That could have been done fairly quickly. And then you would have started the long task of repealing and amending legislation. Legislation that had been put in place for the previous 43 years, and now we've had another almost 3 years of it. It isn't possible to disentangle all that in a 2-year period. You would have had to selected your priorities, started repealing and amending, and then telling the EU how it was going to work. Some of it would have been more important than others, and something like the uniform size of wine glasses directive, whatever that is, you could have left that on the side and said, well, look at that, in the years to come we may never need to repeal it, but it's our law and we decide whether we keep it or not. I did see a figure, that was 3 years ago, that the total amount of EU legislation in place, if you counted every jot and tittle, was something like 175,000 pieces contained in about 19,000 directives. And I can tell you it's been going up, because in the last 3 sessions in the European Parliament in Strasbourg, we've done something which I've never seen in the previous 15 years. We've had double voting sessions. We've been voting in the morning and we've been voting again at 5 o'clock in the evening because they have been putting through a torrent of legislation to make sure that it's on the books before Britain leaves, and we will be bound by that, even if we had Mrs May's dismal withdrawal agreement. Now, the British people voted to leave by 17.4 million to 16.1. And probably now, if you had another referendum, even more would want to leave because they no longer believe Project Fear. Although I have to say, you have to give it to the mainstream media. They've done a marvellous job over the last 2 years and 10 months of telling people why we can't leave and it's all too difficult, and trotting out as many so-called experts as they can to tell you it can never be done. What does this whole process show us? It shows that there is a tremendous disconnect between the political class and ordinary people who voted to leave. I'll just give you a few figures. Out of the constituencies in the country, 406 voted leave, while 241 voted remain. In Labour seats, 148 voted leave, while 84 voted remain. In Conservative seats, 247 voted leave, while 80 voted remain. And of the 12 regions of the United Kingdom, including, of course, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and the 9 regions of England, 9 voted to leave and 3 voted to remain. But this is where you get the disconnect. Out of MPs, about 160 voted leave, while about 486 voted remain. And this shows up the tremendous disconnect that I just described. Can you imagine a general election where a political party had won that amount of support with a vast majority of the constituencies, a vast majority of the MPs? They would have said, what's to argue about? Governments in this country get elected on as little as 42 or 40%, 44% of the vote. That's about what Mrs Thatcher and Tony Blair had. And they did the most draconian things on the basis of a minority of the vote. But no one was arguing because that was the democratic system. But everybody on the Remain side and in the media wants to argue about the Leave result because they say people didn't know what they were voting for, or they were too stupid, or they were too old and they're going to die anyway. Try using those arguments in a general election and find out how far you get. We do live nominally anyway, still in a democracy, and the only way you can influence things is through the ballot box. And this referendum is a golden opportunity. Did I say referendum? It's Freudian slip. This European parliamentary election is a golden opportunity for people to do that. And what are they voting for? Well, I think that they should vote UKIP because of the reasons I've given you. We are the real party of Brexit. And we're not a one-issue party. We're not a Tory safety valve that will disappear after the European elections when its MEPs are safely installed in Brussels. UKIP is a clear domestic political threat to the political establishment in the UK. And that is why they would like to see us off the map in this particular election. Well, UKIP was meant to disappear off the map over a year ago. When I took over the leadership, we were on the brink of collapse. We had been deliberately, in my opinion, I can't prove it, brought to that extremity. We were on the brink of financial collapse. We were about to go insolvent. Politically, we were on the brink of collapse, and membership was falling through the floor at a rate of about 1,000 a month. I took on the job not because I have any personal political ambition. I don't particularly like working 6 or 7 days a week, but I did it because nobody else would do it. Literally nobody else would pick it up. And some of these MEPs now that you see siding with another party told me back in January, February of 2018, it's all over, Gerard, it's finished, but you'd be a great person to take over the leadership and wind the party down and close it down. And I said, are you kidding? Do you think I've worked all of these years to achieve Brexit? You come here, you take your salary, you take your allowance, and you're telling me to close it down? No way. And then I think that was the thing that goaded me into accepting this job, to say that I would try and revive it. And what job have I done over the last year? I'll tell you. We turned the fortunes of the party around in the most difficult circumstances. The party is now financially secure. We have enough money coming in to cover our operational costs. It's given me enough money to hire staff. I started off on my own. And where's Liz Phillips here?
Yeah.
If it hadn't been for Liz, I couldn't have functioned for the first few months. Liz Phillips actually took a day off of annual leave every week to come into my office and be my personal assistant, apart from the fact that she was working evenings and weekends for me as well. And before I was able to raise enough money to take her on as my permanent personal assistant full-time. And it's because of people like that who believe that this party has survived, and there are lots and lots of them. The people who are now insulted by other well-known politicians for their membership of UKIP are the same people in many thousands that supported this party under its previous leader, who went out and tramped the streets and delivered leaflets and fought in elections and did the hard, grinding work that they got no credit for. This party was not the province of one man. The election campaigns that we fought were not the province of one man, and the referendum campaign was not the province of one man. And we have had thousands more join us since I took over. Membership went down to about a low of about 17,000, and it's now currently up to about 30,000, and it's going up all the time. That is a party of ordinary, decent British people who want to live in a democratic country governed by their own laws, under their own constitution, by their own democratically elected MPs in Westminster. And that's what we stand for. And that's what those thousands of ordinary British people stand for. And I want thousands more of them to join during this election campaign. And what's it going to look like? Well, we've already raised enough money to print and distribute 27 million leaflets. There will be one going to every household in the country during this campaign. And our message is very simple. A vote for UKIP is a vote to leave the European Union, unconditional, unilateral withdrawal. Send a message to your MPs in Westminster that that's what you want, that's what you expect, and that's what you demand of them. We will, of course, be doing a party political broadcast. That will be made very shortly. And of course there's going to be a bit of an early poll on this. I'm not talking about the dodgy made-up polls that you see in the paper, which are then reported by all the other papers as gospel truth. I'm talking about a real poll of electors on the 2nd of May, when there are 1,420 UKIP candidates in parts of England and Northern Ireland. We trebled the number, almost, of candidates since I took over, and I think that is a marvellous achievement. Not for my achievement, the achievement of all those ordinary volunteers who are now tramping the streets, putting out leaflets and campaigning on our message. We are a real party. We're not a party of renegade MEPs who wanted to close down their previous party. We're not a party of rich men and women. We are not a party of conservatives who can't vote for their own party, so they vote for an alternative Tory party. We are a real party that seeks to represent people from across all the different social classes in this country on patriotic policies which put the interests of the British people and the British nation first. What kind of party are we? I'll say three very simple things. What kind of party are we? Let me sum it up for you, which I tried to do a little while back, produced a little leaflet. What do we believe in? We believe in national democracy, political democracy and economic democracy. What does that mean? National democracy. You cannot be a democratic country if you are part of the European Union where your laws are made by other people, designed by bureaucrats in Brussels and Strasbourg. If you're a part of that group, you are not a democratic nation, and we want to be a truly national democratic nation. Political democracy, what does that mean? We have one of the most skewed voting systems in the world. We have a first-past-the-post system designed for two parties where we now operate in a multi-party system. And as I said to you, governments can be elected on 42, 44% of the vote. MPs can be elected on 30-odd% of the vote. In some constituencies, 60-odd% of the vote it doesn't elect anybody. How can that possibly be fair? Politics is a free market, so let's have free access to the market. Let's have a proportional representation system where people get what they voted for in the proportion that they voted for. And then we can all put our case to the British people and see who comes out with the most votes. And perhaps some people will be forced to work in coalition with others in government. And if that had happened, if there had been a PR system, UKIP would have had MPs a long, long time ago. And if we'd have been in coalition with Conservative or even Labour, over the last 3 years, you might have seen a completely different Brexit from the one that you've got now. And lastly, I spoke about economic democracy. How can you live in a democracy if your economy is not run for the benefit of your own people? We need an economy outside of the common agricultural policy, outside of the common fisheries policy, outside of over-regulation on business, where the interests of ordinary working people are reflected in the kind of economy that we have. And I think those three political principles are the kind of thing that the ordinary British person wants to hear. So I hope very much, this is going to be a long campaign, we're going to have 5 more weeks of this, but I hope that at the end of it the British people will take the view that the real party of Brexit is UKIP. UKIP will be sending MEPs to Brussels not to get their snouts back into the gravy train. You don't get your snout in a gravy train, you get it in a trough. But the gravy train's, the trough's on the gravy train. They're not going there for their own self-interest. Indeed, we don't know how long they are going back there because we don't know when we're leaving. Is it going to be in October? Is Article 50 going to be extended again? This is why you need a body of MEPs there who do not want to perpetuate their existence, who are going there in order to argue that we leave. And more importantly, they argue it back here. I've spent most of my time over the last 15 years in this country arguing that we should leave the European Union. So what I hope on the 23rd of May is that the British people will vote in very, very big numbers for a genuine party of Brexit, and that is the UK Independence Party. Now what we're going to do now, we're going to introduce some of the candidates.